Hey guys, this is Verneer for cardrunners.com, bringing you a Building the Bankroll 2014 series. So the first episode is going to focus on under the gun play, but in general the series is going to entail how to make money in 2014 playing the 6 max micro and small stakes. So a little bit about the series. So it's based on 6 max no limit hold'em. All the hands that I'm going to use as examples, all the actual hands, are played on stars and full tilt poker. This was my hands from Canada from last year, but I'm going to pick and choose what I think are applicable examples to today's games. So there's going to be quite a bit of theory discussion. It's really important to understand not just the what, but the why on why you should do certain things and why you should not do other things. So understanding both of those things is going to help you generalize to situations in which there's no cookie cutter approach. So it's really important to, first of all, understand what ABC poker is at kind of the lower stakes, and then taking that to the next level, it's really also important to understand when to deviate from it. So for example, in general, we're not going to be opening King 10 offsuit under the gun, but there are situations in which you should open King 10 offsuit under the gun. So you want to understand when to make exceptions from the general rules, because that's definitely going to make you a lot of money. Lots of real examples from 50 no limit and 100 no limit. Like I said, from stars and full tilt poker. And hopefully by the end of this series, you should have a complete model of solid play, which means you should have you should know what to do in about 80% of situations. I think a lot of play is relatively straightforward at the micro and small stakes, and the hands that you see posted on the forums are a lot of them are really, really marginal hands in which there's really no like clear answer in what to do in a lot of situations. So after this series, I'm hoping that you'll know what to do 90% of the time, and you're going to be able to make correct plays. So since this episode is going to focus on under the gun play, let's look at a couple of facts about under the gun play and their implications. So first of all, you're going to face a 3-bet around 20% of the time. It's going to be less at the very micro stakes, and then it goes up as you move up. So I think around 100 no limit, you're going to be 3-bet like 18-20% of the time. Obviously, at like 2 no limit, it's going to be much lower than that. You're also perceived to have your strongest raising range. Most players play relatively tight from under the gun, and you should as well. And we'll talk about which hands to open and why you should open them in a second. But the solid regulars know that you're going to have a strong raising range. So the implication of these two facts means that your 4-bets, this is the situation in which your 4-bets get the most respect. So that's going to be important when we construct our ranges and talk about how we want to respond to aggression when we face a 3-bet. So another fact about under the gun play is you're going to be out of position post-flop most of the time, and most of the time you're going to be in a heads-up pot. So that means that you need hands that you can double barrel. Now that's either for value or because you pick up turn equity. So as you construct your range, you're going to have to construct it with this in mind. You need hands that you're going to be able to continue with strongly on the turn. So, all that said, let's discuss what to open. So I'm going to start with just a general opening chart for under the gun play. So this is As you can see, I've got it color coded, and I want to discuss the individual groups. I would say this is around 16-17% of hands. And I would say that's a reasonable ABC opening range. So that is the what. The rest of the video we'll talk about the why. Like, why is it that we open these hands? And we also want to talk about making adjustments. So we can add or subtract from this range. The two key things that I would focus on is how aggressive are the people that are going to have position on you. So the more aggressive they are, the more you want to open tighter, but 3-bet wider. So we'll talk about that in a bit. And second of all, who's in the blinds? So if you have weak players in the blinds, then you want to be opening wider. So definitely be aware of who is in which positions. If you have really tight people in the middle position, cutoff, and button, then you can open a wider range because they're not going to 3-bet you as much. And in fact, they're just going to be folding more. And if you have loose players in the blinds, then you can be opening a wider range because hands like King Jack, if they're going to be calling with weaker jacks and weaker kings, are going to play well against them. So that's the opening range. Couple things about that. So let's, as you can see, I've got all pocket pairs. Now the 2s through 7s, I've got them light green. 8s through jacks, I've got them darker green, and queens through aces. So queens through aces are definitely your premium hands. They play really well on all kinds of flops. 2s through 7s, for the most parts, we're going to play for set value, and we'll look at a chart in a second that's going to show that. 8s through jacks are, I would say, they're probably the most difficult hands to play, and just because they often hit solid like second pair or like weak over pairs. You've got your very strong suited broadways, ace jack through ace king, and then your offsuit strong broadways. You've got your kind of weaker suited connectors, 7-8 suited through jack 10 suited. They hit reasonable pairs, but a lot of those you're going to have to navigate turns in reverse. Then you've got your suited reasonable broadways, queen 10 suited, queen jack suited, king 10 suited, king jack suited, ace 10 suited. These allow you to double barrel, but they also hit reasonably strong top or middle pairs with good kickers. And then you've got your suited aces, which are non-Broadway, and those hands are going to hit nut flush draws or nut flushes or very strong trips. But for the most part, they're kind of a tricky group to play as well because we're not looking to flop a lot of top pairs with this. So I'll break down each of these groups individually and talk about how to play them. We'll start with pocket pairs. So the first thing to understand is how often, and this is just something you want to keep in mind, how often you're going to have a favorable flop. So a favorable flop I would define as hitting an overpair or a set. Now, as you can see, queens through aces are great. So queens through aces, you're going to flop. You're going to flop favorably, roughly half the time or better. Now, 2s through 7s, you're mostly playing for set value. So if you hit a set, there's a bunch of different ways to play it. But we feel pretty good about our hands. And sets are easy to play whether you're in position or out of position. The difficult ones and the ones that people find the most trouble with or have the most trouble with are 8s through jacks. So we'll spend quite a bit of time, or I would say I'll spend more time on 8s through jacks than on the other ones, just because they're the most difficult to play. So let's look at some examples of overpairs. Not just overpairs, but queens through aces. We'll start with queens through aces. Then we'll do 2 through 7s, and then we'll spend the rest of the time talking about 8s through jacks. So here is the first hand. We're going to have queens. We raise that under the gun. The small blind and big blind has, looks like everybody else at the table it's got pretty reasonable stacks. But we've got 2 unknowns in the blinds. They both end up calling. And the flop comes 2-7-9. So there is a straight draw and a flush draw out there. We've got a donk bet by one of the short stacks and a flat call by the unknown. So at this point, I'm not giving them too much credit, and I'm certainly happy to get it all in against the short stack. And so I go ahead and bump it up quite big. So I make it 19 to commit myself against the short stack. When I say short stack, I mean shorter stack. And both players call. So the turn is a 5, which puts another draw out there, and it completes 6-8. But other than that, I don't think it's too much help to either person. So I guess it could also, if someone has a 7-5, then it helps them as well. So the first person checks, and the second person fires $50. So at this point, it's either shove or fold for me. And just the donk bet makes me think that I'm good. And in general, against a player that I don't know too much about, I'm probably going to be stacking off here. So I put it all in and get a call, and I was up against 6-7. So I was up against a pair and a gut shot on the turn, and pick up a pretty substantial pot. So on the flop, so let me go to the flop. Against that donk bet situation, just definitely raising it up. And on the turn, since it doesn't help as much, I just commit myself and go with it. If the turn was the 5 of diamonds and the person would have donk bet like that, I probably would have gotten away from it. But the 5 of clubs is just unlikely to help that much, and I'm able to take down a pretty nice pot. Another pocket queens hand. Raise it from under the gun. Get 1 caller on the button. So Mr. Million 7 is playing 2011, which is, it's definitely tight, but it strikes me as a little bit passive. That gap between the VPIP and PFR is, it's quite big there. So we flop an overpair on a draw heavy board, bet, and get called. The turn doesn't really change anything, but if he has like an ace high flush draw, then he can pick up some additional equity with it. So I bet again, and I actually think I should be betting bigger here. I should bet something like 14 or so to charge the draws, and he calls again. So the river's an ace, which is a pretty bad card. Ace jack just got there. If he has a ace high flush draw, then now he picks up top pair and he's not going to fold. And if he had just some kind of a gut shot with an ace, then he's got that as well. He's got top pair as well. So I don't think there's much value in betting, because if he has a hand like 9s or 10s, or like king jack, then he's not going to call a value bet. Nor do I think he's actually going to bet them himself. So I think this is a spot where I can check fold. So I end up checking. I think the hands that have showdown value against me are going to just check behind. I think he's going to check behind he's definitely going to value bet ace jack. He might value bet an ace high flush draw, although I think some of those are going to check behind too. But this is just not a good spot for him to like, I don't expect this kind of a player to be bluffing in this spot. So I think if I check and he's got a better hand, I can just check fold. So he checks behind and he ends up having pocket tens. So definitely betting the flop, definitely betting the turn. And I think with that ace coming on the river, I think I could check fold there and feel okay about that. Pocket queens one more time versus a kind of a weaker player. He checks. I bet $4 and he ends up min raising it to 8. So I'm not giving him a lot of credit in this spot. I think this is going to either be a bluff or something like 6s or 7s or whatever. So I end up calling. There's no reason to do anything other than call here. The turn is a 5. So that's not a great card because if he had a 5, then he now improved. But he overbet shoves. So usually in that situation, an overbet shove, I mean, it's not that much of an overbet. But you know, he makes it more than pot. And just the fact that he shoves makes me think that, like, he very seldom is he going to have a king here. He might have a 5, but I'm just always skeptical of somebody shoving with a full house here. So it just seems to me like a 6s or 7s or just some kind of a weird bluff that he has. So I call pretty quickly, and to my surprise, he does have the full house with the king. So he played it unconventionally, but I think it's a fairly straightforward call on the flop with the queens, and then call pretty quickly on the turn. Pocket kings. I'm not sure why it's laid out like that. It makes me think that it was a full ring table, but I'm not sure. It's one of the afterburner tables on full tilt. So 2 players call, the kind of the weaker player and then a regular in the big blind. All right, so I flop an overpair. The regular leads. I think raising here is okay, but I also don't mind keeping the weaker player in. So if I flat here and the weaker player raises, then I can reshove. So he ends up just folding. So the turn is an 8, which doesn't change anything. 6-9 would be weird in this spot. I'm trying to think of what other 6-4 got there. But in general, I don't expect the 8 to change much. So the player checks. I bet like right around 3/4 spot, a little bit less. And then he ends up shoving on me. So I've got $80 left. I really don't have too much of a read on this player, and I'm not sure what he could be doing this with. But in this spot, I've got $80 behind. It's just a weird spot to be in, and I really don't know where I'm at in the hand. Like I don't think him shoving with ace queen makes too much sense here. I don't think king queen makes too much sense. So I'm just really not sure where I am in the hand, and I just end up folding. Definitely kind of a marginal spot, but I think the risk kind of outweighs the reward here, especially without having too much of a read. Kings again. I get a flat from the big blind from a shorter stack player. So I bet, and he raises. So this is a spot where I think I'm going to have a lot of bluffs are going to be raising that flop. So in this situation, I'm going to flat in position. If I was out of position, I would 3-bet to maintain control of the hand, but in this case, there's really no need for me to do so. So I flat, and the turn is perfect card. The 5 doesn't change anything. The person leads for 14, and at this point, I'm going to go ahead and put them all in. If they have some kind of a draw, then I still want them to call with the draw, and if they have a top pair type hand, then I want them to call it off. So they end up calling it off, and they ended up having a really strong draw on the flop. So I'm actually going to check what the odds are on the flop. So they're actually favored on the flop. So getting to the turn reduces their equity considerably. But I like calling the flop, and like I said, on the turn, at this point, just get it all in, and yeah. Pocket kings, raise, get a call from a relatively unknown player. So I flop second pair with a nut blocker. I end up leading that flop and end up getting a call. So the turn I'm not thrilled with. I do pick up additional equity with the king, but this is not a spot where I want to be double barreling. Like, the person could very well have ace queen, ace jack with a spade. So I end up checking that. He bets relatively small. So at this point, I think I could still have the best hand, and I certainly have the best draw. So I end up calling. The river gives me the nuts. Well, it doesn't, but it gives me essentially the nuts. And now, since I'm out of position, I'm going to go ahead and lead. I lead for 18 bucks. I can probably lead bigger here. I can lead for maybe like 24, because if he's going to have a spade, he's going to be calling here very frequently. But I definitely like leading the river, and he does end up looking me up with top 2. So I ended up sucking out here, but I think the river has to be a lead. The flop, I like a bet. The turn, I could lead again on the turn, just kind of as a blocker bet to set my own price. And I think that might be the way to go. But I don't mind checking either, because if it goes check, I think that's fine. If I check and he bombs it, I'm kind of in a bad spot. So I think, given all that, I think kind of blocker betting the turn, something like $8 or $9, I think is a reasonable play there, probably the best play. And the river's a mandatory lead, regardless. Pocket aces, get a call. Definitely continuation bet that flop. I face a raise, so just like with the in the previous situation where we had the pocket kings, drive a flop. I think this is going to be a bluff a lot. So if it's a bluff, I'm going to flat. The turn is a 10, which isn't great, because now top pair got there as well. So at this point, I'm going to just flat. I think if it was some kind of a blank card, I might raise at this point. But with the 10 coming, I'm just gonna flat. And the river's an ace, so it completes the flush draw. The person checks. I obviously have I've got the nuts. So at this point, I think anything other than shoving is poor. So they've got essentially a pot-sized bet. If they have a flush, if they have a 10, then they're going to call. If they have a flush, and for some reason they end up checking the river, they're going to call again. So I think now the only play left is shove. He ends up calling me. He ended up rivering essentially his one outer. Although I think he might have shoved on a blank on the river. But it just shows that out of position, it makes sense to flat a couple times in this kind of a situation, just because if someone is bluffing, you want them to continue bluffing. So I'm going to show a couple unorthodox ways of playing big pairs too. So this is a spot where check folding quite frequently with kind of my smaller pairs. Just because I think this hits a lot of players' pre-flop calling ranges, just two broad ways. So I end up checking my aces here, and kind of a small bet. I end up check calling that, and the player bets, like, leads for half pot again on the turn. So now at this point, I think I'm almost always good, and I think they've got some kind of a one pair type hand that they're just trying to get value from. So now I end up raising. So I end up check raising the turn. I like my raise amount. I can maybe even make it bigger, like 22. I think 22 would be good. But I end up getting called. The river's an 8, and I can probably bet. I end up betting 26 here. So a little bit less than half the pot, but I think I can go bigger. At this point, I think they've got some kind of a made hand, like an ace-jack or a king-queen, maybe even as strong as an ace-queen. But I think their most likely hand is some kind of a jack or some kind of a queen. The 8 doesn't change anything. If they had 9-10, then they got there. But I think I can bet something like $38 and get paid off by a one pair type hand, just because of kind of the weird way that I play it. So he ends up calling, and he ended up having 10-jack. So he ended up having a weak jack, and I got paid off. But like I said, I think I can, because this is a flop that I'm going to be check folding quite a bit. I think checking my aces can sometimes produce me more value than if I just went bet, bet, bet. It certainly did in this case. I don't think I'm getting 3 streets of value with my aces in this case. Here is a 25-50 hand, raise pocket aces. End up continuation betting that board and face a pretty substantial raise. So I've got the nut flush blocker. I don't think a king is going to put in this kind of a raise here. Like king, queen, king, jack, I think is just going to be flatting. So the two hands that I'm worried about are 5s and 6s, which definitely, given the stack sizes, I could see them raising. But I end up flatting. The turn is a 5, which is really good for me, because it now reduces the likelihood that the person has pocket 5s. So I would end up check calling the turn as well. Depending on the bet size, I might end up just check raising all in. But it goes check, check. And the river's a king. So the king is really not a scary card for me, just because I don't think a king raises the flop. So I end up checking again. I don't think there's a lot of value in betting, because I think now his range is mostly comprised of like busted flush draws and other kind of draws. So he puts up a substantial bet in there. This player's relatively loose and aggressive as well, playing 29-24 with a 71% 3-bet, and he has yet to fold to a continuation bet. So the river is a really easy check call. I don't like leading the river. I don't think there's a lot of merit to it, unless I end up like lead calling, which I'm not crazy about. So I think calling the flop makes the most sense, just because there's a lot of bluffs in his range. The turn, I would definitely check call. On the river, I would end up check calling. And if he shows me 6s, that's fine. But the way the hand played out, the river, it makes the most sense to check call the river. And he shows just absolute air on that flop. So, I hope the first video was helpful. If you guys have any questions or comments, please let me know. And we will pick up with some more under the gun play in the next video. Until next time, for CarOwners.com, this has been Verneer. Good luck at the tables, guys.